The morning the company fell apart began like every other. Cold coffee, unread emails, and the low hum of ambition vibrating through the glass walls of Lenox and Vale. The city was still waking, its skyline tinted in pale orange. When Claire arrived, always the first, always early. For 12 years she had been the quiet architect of the firm's stability, the one who stayed long after presentations ended and lights dimmed, who fixed the numbers no one wanted to face. Across the river, her former partner, now CEO, was preparing for a shareholder call that would change everything. Her name was Serena Vale, and for a decade the two had built an empire out of recycled metal and reclaimed dreams. Sustainable architecture, that was their creed. They started in a rented basement with 2 desks, 1 cracked window, and the kind of belief that keeps people alive through bad years. Claire had the structure, Serena had the spark. Together, they made something worth admiring. But admiration can turn ownership in the wrong light. And by the time the firm reached national acclaim, Serena had begun speaking in singular terms. Her speeches shifted from we to I, her interviews filled with pronouns that erased partnership. At first, Claire told herself it was harmless, a symptom of visibility. Serena was the face, she was the frame, invisible, essential, replaceable. Or so it seemed. The unraveling started quietly, as most betrayals do. A missing signature on a contract, a sudden exclusion from meetings she had always attended, a project redirected to new leadership. Claire noticed the pattern but said nothing. Her loyalty was built on the bones of endurance. She believed that staying calm would protect what they'd built. When the formal announcement came, it was delivered through a press release. Serena Vale appointed as sole owner and CEO of Lenox and Vale, following internal restructuring. Claire read it on her phone in a parking lot, her reflection flickering against the black screen like a ghost. She hadn't been fired, not yet, but the message was clear. She was no longer part of the story. The next weeks unfolded in slow motion. Serena moved through the office like a monarch in a borrowed palace. She replaced the rough wood tables Claire had chosen with glass and steel. The walls, once filled with sketches and blueprints, were now covered in digital renderings of the new era. The employees adapted quickly, like birds adjusting to a new migration route. They smiled differently, spoke in rehearsed enthusiasm, and avoided Claire's eyes in the hallways. There was no explosion, no confrontation, just silence, weaponized. Claire's name disappeared from internal memos. Her access to files was quietly revoked. Her projects were reassigned under different management for efficiency. The company newsletter published a glowing feature on Serena's visionary leadership. Claire was mentioned once as part of the early team that helped shape the foundation. Early team, as if she had been a temp who once delivered coffee. When her termination email arrived, it was automated, unsigned, effective immediately. "Thank you for your contributions to Lenox and Vale." She stared at it until the words blurred. No one came to her office. No one said goodbye. The sound of her own breathing filled the space where purpose used to be. That afternoon, she walked through the empty corridors she had once designed. The hallways smelled of new paint and erasure. The company had always been her compass. Now it was a museum of someone else's ambition. At the reception desk, the new logo gleamed in brushed gold. Vale Architecture Group. The Lenox part, her name was gone. Outside, the city pulsed with indifferent noise. Claire sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel, watching the reflection of the building shimmer in the windshield. It was still beautiful. She had made it that way. But beauty meant nothing without belonging. In the weeks that followed, Serena's firm rose higher. Magazines called her the Visionary Woman of the Year. Television anchors praised her as the face of modern sustainability. Every photo of her smile felt like a cut. Claire couldn't stop reopening. She watched from a distance, through screens and headlines, until resentment became routine. But pain has a way of clarifying memory. The late nights returned in fragments. The contracts Claire had written, the partnerships she had negotiated, the quiet choices that kept the company solvent when the economy dipped. Her signature was buried in the foundation of everything Serena now owned. And somewhere in that mountain of paperwork, she knew, was a key Serena had overlooked, something binding, something legal, something that still belonged to her. She started digging through her personal archives, boxes of old documents stored in the back of her apartment closet. The air smelled of dust and printer ink. Each folder was a year of her life, neatly labeled and color-coded, the way she managed chaos. Somewhere between the folders marked 2013 contracts and 2015 financial restructuring, she found it. A partnership agreement, drafted by their first attorney before the company went public. It contained a clause Serena had probably forgotten, that in the event of a unilateral takeover, the founding partner, not assuming the CEO role, retained first right of reclamation to any projects originated under joint ownership. It wasn't much, but it was something. She didn't plan revenge, she planned resurrection. There was a difference. Revenge required fire. Resurrection required patience. Claire had both time and clarity now. While Serena's firm expanded into glass and mirror skyscrapers, Claire began working quietly from a co-working space downtown. She called it Studio L, short for Lennox, the part of her name no one could take. She didn't announce it, didn't post, didn't seek investors. She just worked. Her designs focused on community housing, sustainable infrastructure, and rebuilding neglected neighborhoods, projects too small for Serena's appetite, but rich in meaning. The first year was survival. The second became momentum. Word spread, quietly, through the network of architects and contractors who still respected her. They sent her clients who wanted substance over spectacle. Her name reappeared in small industry journals, then in larger ones. By the time Serena's firm won an international award, Claire had already been shortlisted for one that mattered more, the City Renewal Grant, a multi-million-dollar contract funded by the same board Serena had once alienated. Still, Claire never reached out, never spoke her name aloud. She watched from the sidelines, the way one might watch a forest regrow after a fire. The company that had been stolen from her was growing, yes, but hollowing too. Whispers of financial instability, delayed payments, internal conflict. Serena had built a monument to herself, and it was starting to crack. Claire did not celebrate. She simply noted it, the way an architect marks the first fracture in a wall. And when the call came, an unexpected message from the city board asking if she would be willing to consult on redevelopment of the Vale headquarters district, she knew the universe had turned quietly, inevitably, in her direction. For the first time in years, she allowed herself a small smile. Not of triumph, but of recognition. The kind you give yourself when the storm finally begins to clear. What Serena had destroyed would soon stand again, only stronger, quieter, and entirely hers. The air in late autumn carried that dry, metallic chill that makes cities feel older than they are. Claire's days had fallen into rhythm: coffee before sunrise, drafting blueprints before emails, pausing only when the light shifted through her office windows. Studio L had grown from a whisper into a pulse. 3 employees, a small but loyal client base, and a reputation built not on noise but on integrity. It wasn't glamorous. Not yet. Her office still smelled faintly of fresh paint and rented carpet. But when she looked at the sketches pinned across the wall, rows of sustainable housing projects, urban gardens, flood-resistant designs, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. Every blueprint was an act of reclamation. Every project, a quiet correction of history. The city had begun to notice. Her designs weren't bold in the way Serena's skyscrapers were, but they breathed life into forgotten corners of the urban grid. Neighborhoods once marked by decay now bore signs that read, "Future Site." Studio L Development. Serena's empire, by contrast, had begun to show fissures. At first, the headlines were subtle. Vale architecture. Faces budget delays. Then, senior designer leaves amid creative differences. Rumors spread that Serena's obsession with grandeur had burned through her resources. She'd traded substance for spectacle, and the market was shifting beneath her feet. Claire never gloated. She didn't even smile when a mutual acquaintance forwarded her a news article about Serena losing a major contract to a new rising firm. She simply filed the email away, a quiet footnote in her growing archive of irony. She had learned long ago that revenge wasn't about fire or fury. It was about endurance and timing. Months passed. Studio L expanded into a 2-story workspace downtown, its walls filled with sunlight and the hum of creation. The team grew to 12. They were young, idealistic, the kind of architects who still believed design could change lives. Claire guided them with a calm certainty, never mentioning the past. None of them knew the full story, only that their leader carried herself with the kind of poise that comes from surviving something sharp. The city renewal grant soon became the cornerstone of her career. The project, a sustainable redevelopment of a derelict industrial district, was massive, complex, and deeply symbolic. It was the same district where Serena's firm had built its first office, before replacing brick with chrome, humanity with ego. Now, the board had chosen Claire to lead its rebirth. She visited the site one foggy morning. The skeletons of old factories loomed around her, rusted and silent. Every beam, every crack in the concrete seemed to echo the past, the long nights she and Serena had once spent dreaming of transformation. And now here she stood, alone, blueprint in hand, about to do what they once swore they'd do together: rebuild the future. The irony was quiet but profound. As she worked, Serena's name appeared in the news again, this time in the wrong column. Lawsuits, delayed payments, employee walkouts. There were whispers of investors pulling out, of unpaid contractors and failed safety audits. Her firm had grown too fast, too bright, like a star collapsing under its own gravity. Claire read the headlines over morning coffee, not with malice, but with a strange sense of inevitability. She had seen it coming. Serena had built a tower without foundation, a monument to herself. And monuments always fall when no one is left to maintain them. Still, Claire felt no victory, only gravity. She remembered the way Serena used to laugh in those early years, before ambition hardened into isolation. For all her cruelty, there had been brilliance there once, the kind that lit up a room, the kind that inspired others to believe. That brilliance had burned out now, leaving only smoke and mirrors. One evening, after another 12-hour day, Claire walked through her studio, the city lights flickering beyond the windows. Her staff had gone home. The only sound was the low hum of the printer and the faint rattle of rain against glass. She stopped at her desk and looked down at a small brass nameplate. Claire Lennox, founder and lead architect. It wasn't gold or glass or anything extravagant, but it was hers. Entirely hers. That same week, the city board announced a press conference to unveil the renewal project. It was the kind of event that drew reporters, photographers, and industry leaders. Claire wasn't interested in spectacle, but she knew attendance was expected. It was part of the process. When she arrived that morning, the venue buzzed with energy. Banners hung from the ceiling, digital displays showcased her designs, parks layered into old industrial frames, housing units made of reclaimed steel and sunlit courtyards. Her firm's logo glowed on every screen. As she stepped toward the podium, she caught a glimpse of someone at the edge of the crowd, a familiar silhouette. Posture, stiff, eyes following her like a ghost from another lifetime. Serena Vale. It had been nearly 3 years since the day Claire left the company. Time had carved fine lines around Serena's eyes, but her expression was still sharp, that practiced, photo-ready calm that once fooled everyone. Only now it looked brittle, like porcelain stretched too thin. Serena's firm, the one she'd stolen, had recently filed for bankruptcy protection. The news had broken just days earlier. The fall had been public and merciless. Reporters whispered as they recognized her, their cameras turning subtly away from her direction, a reversal of attention that must have felt like a wound. Claire stood at the podium, her heart steady. The lights dimmed, the projector flickered to life, and her designs filled the screen behind her renderings of renewal, of balance, of second chances. As she spoke about sustainable architecture and community resilience, she could feel Serena's gaze still fixed on her. Not with anger now, but with something quieter disbelief. Perhaps even recognition. Claire's voice remained calm, her words deliberate, every syllable measured. She didn't mention the past, didn't reference what had been taken, what had been lost. She spoke only of rebuilding, of creating structures meant to last, not for ego, but for people. When the presentation ended, the audience rose in applause. Cameras flashed. Reporters crowded forward with questions. Claire smiled politely, shook hands, and thanked them. But as she stepped away from the podium, she turned once, meeting Serena's eyes across the room. There was no triumph in her expression, only peace, the kind that comes after years of quiet labor, after realizing you don't need revenge when you have purpose. Serena, for the first time, looked small. Later that night, when the lights had dimmed and the crowd dispersed, Claire walked alone through the half-renovated district, the one her firm was now transforming. She paused beside a scaffold, running her fingers across the cool metal frame. The sound of the city pulsed faintly in the distance. She thought about how fragile everything had once seemed: success, loyalty, partnership, and how steady it felt now, rebuilt on solitude and honesty. Serena had destroyed what they built together. But in doing so, she had given Claire something greater, the freedom to rebuild it alone, and to do it right. Winter came early that year. The city seemed to exhale in slow, silver breaths, the skyline softened by frost. From her office window, Claire watched snow settle on the half-finished rooftops of the renewal district, the project that had become the heartbeat of her new life. The cranes moved like patient sentinels against the pale sky, steady, unhurried, building what would outlast them all. 2 years had passed since that press conference. The district was almost complete now, a living symbol of recovery. The city called it the Lenox District in honor of her leadership. The name surprised her at first. She hadn't asked for it. But it felt right, not as a monument to ego, but as a quiet reclamation of history. Each structure told a story. Homes that recycled their own rainwater. Solar bridges connecting communities once divided by decay. Green courtyards where children played beside the remnants of old factory walls. The city had found balance again, and in that balance, so had she. Serena Vale, once a name spoken in admiration, had faded from the industry like a rumor no one wanted to repeat. Her company's assets had been sold, her offices emptied, her reputation quietly erased by time and consequence. The last article Claire ever saw about her was a brief piece in a trade journal, a small note about Vale Architecture formally dissolving all operations. No photo, no statement, just an ending. But endings, Claire had learned, weren't always final. One cold February morning, an email arrived in her inbox from an unfamiliar address. The subject line was simple: request for meeting. There was no signature, but she knew instantly who it was from. The tone, restrained, almost brittle, carried a weight she recognized. She didn't answer right away. For 3 days she left it unread, as if silence could serve as both judgment and forgiveness. But curiosity, and perhaps compassion, guided her to reply. A week later, she agreed to meet in a neutral place. A small cafe by the river where they had once spent hours sketching their first designs on napkins. The morning was grey, the water slow and metallic under the winter light. Claire arrived early, as always, and sat near the window. When Serena entered, it took her a moment to recognize her. The sharp angles of her confidence had softened. Her hair was shorter, her clothes understated. The aura of perfection that once followed her had dissolved into something human, almost fragile. They greeted each other with a brief nod, not warmth, not hostility, just acknowledgement. Serena spoke first, her voice quieter than Claire remembered. She didn't apologize outright, not in the conventional sense, but her posture carried the weight of apology. She spoke about mistakes, about pride, about how success can hollow a person when it isn't shared. She mentioned how her firm had grown too fast, how investors had turned cold, how isolation became the only company she had left. Claire listened. She didn't interrupt, didn't try to fill the silence that hung between sentences. It wasn't forgiveness she was searching for. It was closure. And closure, she realized, often arrives disguised as empathy. When Serena finally stopped speaking, the quiet stretched between them like a bridge. Claire thought about everything they'd built, the first sketches, the arguments, the triumphs, the ruin. She thought about the girl Serena used to be, the one who believed architecture could heal. Somewhere along the way, that girl had been consumed by her own reflection. Claire didn't say much, just that she hoped Serena would find something meaningful again, something worth building, even if it was small. And that was enough. They parted without promises or plans, just a faint, unspoken understanding that some stories don't need redemption, they only need to end. As weeks passed, Claire rarely thought of her again. Life filled its own spaces. Studio L grew beyond her imagination. New branches, mentorship programs, scholarships for young women in architecture. She saw echoes of her younger self in those students. Ambitious, hopeful, a little scared, but determined. She taught them the lesson she had earned, in blood and silence, that creation without humility becomes destruction. On the day the Lenox district officially opened, the city hosted a public ceremony. It wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. Local families, city officials, and the workers who had built it gathered beneath the curved steel arch that marked the entrance. Snow drifted lightly through the air, catching the morning sun in glints of silver. Claire stood on the small stage, the sound of applause washing over her like a tide she no longer feared. She looked out at the crowd, faces filled with hope, with pride, and felt something inside her settle, a final alignment between the woman she had been and the one she had become. As she spoke about rebuilding, her words came slow and deliberate. She didn't talk about loss, or betrayal, or revenge. She talked about resilience, about how destruction can be a strange kind of teacher, about how sometimes the only way to rebuild what's been lost is to start from the ground up with quieter hands and stronger roots. When the ribbon was cut and the applause began again, Claire stepped down from the stage and walked alone through the district. Children ran past her, their laughter echoing between the new walls. The air smelled of cedar and fresh paint. The buildings glowed faintly under the winter sun, alive in a way that steel and glass alone could never be. And then, as she reached the far edge of the district, she saw her. Serena stood across the street, near the old brick wall that had survived demolition, the only piece of the past Claire had intentionally preserved. She wasn't part of the ceremony. No one else seemed to notice her. She just stood there, hands in her coat pockets, watching, in silence. For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Serena's expression was unreadable. Pride, sorrow, maybe both. She gave the faintest nod, as if to acknowledge what had been done, what had been lost, and what had been found again. Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Claire didn't follow. She simply watched, letting the image fade into the movement of the city. Some endings, she realized, are meant to be witnessed, not rewritten. As the sun broke through the clouds, light spilled across the district, reflecting off glass, brick, and water. Claire looked up, breathing in the cold, clean air. She had watched Serena destroy everything they built, the company, the partnership, the trust. But now Serena had seen her rebuild it, not the same structure, but something better, something unbreakable. And that, Claire thought, was justice enough.